Trump just keeps on winning on inflation. A new op-ed in the town hall, written by E.J. Antoni, crushes the media's forecast on catastrophic inflation. They were just pumping this up like dire, right?
They were.
But now consumer prices rose an average of less than 0.1%. Shocking the mainstream media and Democrats that were rooting against America and President Trump.
As they always do, let's bring in our economy panel to discuss. Richard Stern is the Director of Budget Policy at the Heritage Foundation, and William Luther is the Director of the American Institute for Economic Research. Good morning, gents.
Good morning.
So, Richard, I have a tissue for you if you're crying against how low inflation is going, but I would venture to say that you're kind of happy, right? So your thoughts on how consumer prices rose an average of less than 0.1% in May?
Well, you know me too well. Tears of joy about that. Look, I think the key thing here, right, is that we all know that energy is the foundation of everything about the economy. Every light you turn on, every factory, using your car, everything, you name it, needs energy. And look, if there's one thing that the last administration declared absolute war on, other than freedom and our rights, it was the energy sector. And one of the very first things that Trump did come into office was remove the government boot off the energy sector, has gone through all of this work to deregulate, to allow permitting. Things in the One Big Beautiful Bill will make it much easier to get energy out of the ground, to produce energy. So that's just a handful of the things, frankly, that he has done that make it easier for prices to go down. And part of the drop in inflation is energy prices coming down. So sky's the limit for what we can do going forward.
Definitely. Treasury's Deputy Secretary Michael Faulkender called out false narratives regarding the economy, quote, saying critics said IRS modernization would fall short. They were wrong. Under President Trump, tax receipts rose up 9.5% in April and 14.7% in May year over year, while cutting $2 billion in wasteful spending. This is what smart, efficient government looks like. William, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we have a couple things going on here. First, the professional forecasters have generally overestimated the effect that these tariffs were going to have on inflation. They have underestimated some of these real side reforms that are taking place, like you just mentioned, that will generally put downward pressure on inflation. So that combination, along with the Fed's ongoing very tight monetary policy, has meant inflation has generally been lower than people expected, and indeed a lot lower, and will likely continue to remain low throughout the rest of the year. The Fed meets today. They'll revise their projections, but I suspect they're going to continue overestimating what inflation will be this year and keeping monetary policy unnecessarily tight as a result.
Yeah, I would agree.
Well, while his state burns down due to anti-ICE protests, that won't stop him from giving what he calls an Econ 101 lesson.
Donald Trump is threatening to defund California, but it's Econ 101. California is a donor state. We provide over $80 billion more in tax revenue to the federal government than the federal government provides to the people of the state of California. We help pay federal bills. So if Donald Trump's going to continue to threaten 40 million Americans that live in California, maybe we should consider withholding those resources.
Richard, Governor Gavin Newsom is right about one thing in those comments. California's a donor state. They just donate tax dollars to wasteful spending and poor judgments by Gavin Newsom, as well as Karen Bass and all the other Democrats in California, making the cost of living in California extremely high. Can you talk about the Econ 101 of his leadership?
Well, it's funny. You're right about that, but there's actually another donation from California that I'm more interested in, and that is taxpayers. People who actually work and produce are leaving the state in droves. California has lost more people than any state in U.S. history, and they are going to places with low tax rates and low regulatory burdens. And, you're absolutely right about this. Look, for everyone watching back at home, money can be used by the private sector to invest, to build future productive capacity, which means more jobs, higher wages, more actual tangible goods and services for all of us to enjoy. Or, as you pointed out, it can be more money stolen by the government to fund transitioning and woke agendas and green energy tax credits. So, yes, I'm with you. I'd rather those $80 billion a year go to real projects that employ real people and make the world a better place. I don't want it to go line the pockets of politicians and their friends in D.C.
Mm-hmm. Well, switching gears a bit to talk about Trump's big, beautiful bill. If the bill passes, Americans can expect to receive as much as $13,300 more in take-home pay. That is, yet again, President Trump putting the American people first. William, of course, the floor hearings with respect to this bill got pushed back a bit, so I don't know if we are going to make that July 4th deadline. It's certainly an important one. Can you talk about some of the implications, and especially this $13,000 that many Americans can expect to receive?
Well, I think that you're right, first of all, that it's going to be very difficult to make that July deadline. And part of the reason for that is that these negotiations are really ongoing. So on the one hand, it looks like we're going to keep the Trump tax cuts, and that's going to be great for Americans. More money in their pockets means that we're going to get more productive consumption and investment than we would if the government were spending that money. On the other hand, still some big debates on the table, like what's going to happen to the SALT cap, what's going to happen to those Medicaid provider taxes. These are razor-thin margins that we're talking about in order to get this bill through, and so those debates are going to take some time.
Right.
Richard, the thing is that many people thought it would take a lot of time to get all these trade deals done, but ongoing talks with China, they have a framework. Trump just actually mentioned that a deal got done with the UK. Hopefully the EU is next. So things are moving along nicely, such that Wall Street and big financiers, they actually started walking back the talk about a recession. So things are looking good. Things are moving forward nicely. What else would you like to see with regard to the economic environment, both micro and macroeconomics, to move things forward?
Now, I think you hit the nail right on the head there. One of the things I'd like to see, and for a long time we've all wanted to see, is frankly a world trade order that runs through the U.S. and not around it. The WTO very famously tends to adjudicate cases against the United States, in part because we invent everything and the rest of the world likes to steal the things that we invent. But, USMCA, some of these one-off trade deals that Trump is doing with Britain bilaterally, some of the talks are going on with the EU, might create a world trade regime that has the U.S. at the center and not simply as a major player on the side. So that's, I think, a good step forward. And then, frankly, building on the tax cuts in the One Big Beautiful Bill, we need to get the tax code simpler. We need to remove the last remaining punitive taxes on businesses, on investors and entrepreneurs. And finally, deregulation. Look, our manufacturers are paying nearly $30,000 a year per worker just to deal with regulations. And that's just on the manufacturing sector. So if we do all those things, America's best days are absolutely ahead of us.
I think you're absolutely right concerning the WTO, but let's not stop there. Let's throw in the WB, the World Bank, the IMF, the UN. We can go down the list of acronyms that we need to get in order. But Richard Stern, William Luther, thank you so much for joining us.